I'm on a journey to get 100 platinum trophies on PlayStation, and my next game is Kingdom Come Deliverance 1. Now, last year I was introduced to these games with the second one, and I was blown away. It stands as my favorite game of all time right now because I love sandbox RPGs like Fallout and Skyrim, and that just took it to a whole new level, and honestly is my new bar for those games, which is a crazy bar, but I just enjoyed so much of it. The RPG choices of it, the random unique encounters in the world, and honestly just the environment you were put into, and honestly the realism of the game too, with crimes that you commit in the game and them figuring out ways to come to the conclusion that you were the one to do it. And it was just such a blast. So I had to go back and play the first one, and what better way to do that than make it a platinum trophy journey and get the full experience in the first game. So let's talk about what we're dealing with here. There's 50 trophies for the base game here, and according to the guide I followed, this is gonna take about 100 hours. But here's the thing, I didn't want to spoil the game for myself and the experience of a first playthrough by just following the guide for the story. So what I did is I just did the first playthrough completely blind and decided that if I did miss any trophies, then I'm just gonna have to go through a second playthrough, which I wouldn't have minded, honestly. I ended up having to do that, but that was because there was 2 trophies that I was definitely not going to be able to do in the first playthrough. Maybe I'm not too sure about that, honestly, now that I'm saying that. And I'll talk about those trophies at the end because they were the last 2 that I went for. But let's get started right into this. Before there was a war to fight, there was a life worth living. Henry grew up in Skalitz, a small silver mining town in Bohemia. The son of a blacksmith, his world was simple. Help your father do your work, keep your head down. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't destined for anything. He was just a kid to get through the day. The game drops you into that life immediately. You're running errands, doing chores, getting into a scrap with the local drunk Kunesh over some money that your father is owed. It's mundane on purpose. The game is showing you exactly what Henry stands to lose. Then Sigismund's forces arrive. King Sigismund of Hungary, who is the half-brother to Wenceslas IV, has invaded Bohemia. His mercenaries, led by the brutal Markfart von Alitz, sweep into Skalitz and burn it to the ground. Henry's father and mother are both killed in the attack, and the town is reduced to ash. Henry himself barely escapes with his life on horseback, and even then he was able to save a young girl by the name of Teresa on the way. This is where we get the first 2 trophies of our game. The first one was for completing the first part in Skalitz, and the next one was for saving Teresa. Henry makes it to Talmberg, a nearby castle town, and was able to deliver the warning of what happened in Skalitz. But Henry's time in Talmberg doesn't last that long, as he, alongside Sir Divish, the Lord of Talmberg, and the soldiers, saw that Radzig and the survivors of Skalitz snuck out at night and were able to start heading towards Rattay, where Radzig and the survivors are going to reside for the time being. After that, Henry has one thought, and that was to go back to Skalitz to bury his parents, even when everyone tells him not to. It's not a smart decision, but it's the most humane one for Henry to think at that moment. By getting a lockpick and sneaking into the Talmberg armory and taking whatever uniform was there to disguise himself and sneak out. When Henry returns to the ruins, the situation gets even uglier. A fellow survivor by the name of Zabishek was found by Henry looting corpses and tried to take the sword that Henry had that was for Sir Radzig that had been commissioned from Martin, Henry's father, but we end up chasing him off. There was also a dog here that could play a role in the future if you had the DLCs in this game, but we're not going to worry about that. But he will be in the second game when we get to that one. Not long after, bandits find Henry, and in that moment he's completely outmatched. This isn't some heroic last stand. It's Henry at his absolute lowest, back in the ashes of his home, with what seems to be the end. And then Teresa steps in, the girl that we saved from earlier. She distracts the bandits long enough for the Talmberg soldiers to arrive and drive them off Henry. From there, it's the Talmberg soldiers who bring Henry and Teresa back to Talmberg, and only after that does Teresa leave with an injured Henry and take him to the Rattay mill, where her uncle runs the mill. And this is where the prologue of the game ends, and we get into the real game. Henry finally leaves the Rattay mill after spending about 2 weeks there in recovery, barely held together by bandages, pain, the whole ordeal. During that time, he quietly racks up a debt to Teresa's uncle the miller, who ended up paying for a doctor to come examine him and make sure he didn't die in the mill no spare bed. The miller can be a kind dude, but he's not running a charity here. So before Henry can think about marching up to Ratai to the Perkstein Castle, where Radzig is residing, he has to settle the debt with the miller, and that means doing something he's never really done before, some proper thievery. The job sounds simple on paper. Go out to the executing grounds, find a corpse that's been buried there, and pull the ring off the body. No talking to anyone, no sword fights, just a grim errand in the shadow of the gallows to pay off what he owes. But when he gets there, he finds out that the ring is already gone. Turns out the executioner took it for himself, and now the only way to make things right was to sneak into the executioner's house and steal it back. After that, we were able to settle the debt and then make our way to the castle to finally have our meeting with Radzig and tell him what happened with the sword that Martin commissioned. When we finally make it up to the castle, we find that Radzig is with Sir Hanush, the Lord of Ratai, and his captain, Bernard, and also Hans Capon, who, I will not lie to you, he's a fan favorite. I cannot stand the guy a lot of the time in this game. Like, there's some moments where he has good, and also in the second game he has his good, but yeah, I am just not a big fan of him. There's no slight against the actor though, he does an amazing job with him. But Henry reports to Radzig about what happened with the sword, and also gets a scolding to by Radzig for what he did by sneaking out of Talmberg against his and Sir Divish of Talmberg's command. And Henry asks to make it up by giving him a chance to work under him and prove himself, and also so that he can learn everything to try to get the sword back, which Radzig reluctantly agrees because of how well people his mother and father were, and it's sort of a way for him to kind of be looked over, which is met by a lot of opposition from Hans, Capon, and Bernard. But Radzig does it anyways, and we are finally taken into Radzig's service by the end of this day. After we got taken into Radzig's garrison, we got another story trophy right here. The next day, Henry sets himself up in Ratai, and this begins the slow grind of becoming someone worth a damn in this game. And it really is a grind. The game kind of holds your hand, but really just throws you in where you generally don't know how to fight. We had to learn how to pick a lock from the miller earlier when we were stealing the ring. Doesn't even know how to read because he's a 15th century blacksmith's son, so you're basically nobody at this point. And so I spent a good portion of the early game doing exactly that, building Henry up from scratch with sword trading with Captain Bernard and learning how to brawl, and every skill feels earned. And to begin our training, per se, after learning combat with Bernard, we had to go to the Bailiff of Ratai, and we were taken into the city's guard to basically just learn how order and somewhat of a militaristic presence is. So with that, we get some new armor, not really the best. They are kind of just thrown some padded clothing and a helmet, and you get a club called a bludgeon, which is basically just a wooden stick. You're not going to basically kill people, but you are going to have the upper hand dealing with, like, you know, criminals and whatnot. And we spent the day training with a man named Nightingale who took us around town, and then by the end, when we had to close up, we ended up at a bar trying to close down the bar for the night, and Hans Capon was there with two other guards that he was becoming friends with. Just kind of out of kind of unusual for a nobleman like Hans Capon to be doing. And the two get in an argument, because this is pretty much how the relationship is and is always going to be sometimes with Hans Capon and Henry. They're just gonna butt heads, they're both stubborn. And so the conversation ends in a brawl where we end up fighting with Hans. And midway through the fight, Hanush shows up and gives a scolding to both of us. And when Hanush tries to get Hans to go to some important meetings with him, Hans says he doesn't want to go because he has to go hunting. And so Hanush decides to punish us both by assigning Henry to look after Hans Capon's hunting trip. And for Hans's punishment is basically just having us with him there. Now, I took a little detour from the main story right here. It kind of has its own little reasons, as these are trophies, and I at the time didn't know they were trophies, but I also didn't want to thoroughly rush this game, so I wanted to kind of do some exploring. And while we were with Nightingale, we got the idea to go back and check on Teresa and see how she's doing, as there is a shared grief with what happened in Skalitz from them being both there. And this kind of turns into something a little bit more, and it's the start of one of our trophies, as there is 3 steps to that. And this first step was just taking a first date, and it was just a walk down the river, and that was pretty much that. And the second one was when I ended up back in Talmberg. I got a message from one of the guards there in Talmberg that Lady Stephanie, who we've seen during the prologue when we were in Talmberg, was looking for us. And so we went over there to go see what was up with her, and she kind of sent us on a quest to go fetch some certain items for a wedding that she had to help prepare. And this ended up being to get the crown for the bride, as it was some noblewoman's wedding. The next one was to fetch the best wine that Stephanie could find for this occasion, and that happened to be in Ratai. And the third one was to get the horse for the bride to basically sit upon as they ride through town celebrating the marriage, which I guess was tradition for them. We had to do certain tasks, as like the crown was missing the main jewel that was supposed to be in the center of it, so we had to go find the guy who ended up being dead, and the bandits had the jewel, so we got that back for the guy to finish up making the crown and brought that back with us. The wine was already all sold out, so we had to enter into an archery contest, as that is the last chance to get that type of wine. And the horse had bucking problems, so Henry had to find out what the song was to calm the horse for you to ride it, and Henry just then sung the horse, and we navigated all that stuff back to Talmberg. And when we got back to Talmberg, Stephanie wanted to reward Henry with a shirt, which then later conversations went on as this was happening, and Henry and Stephanie got to business, which is crazy enough in itself, as Stephanie is married to Sir Divish, which, yeah, so that didn't turn out so well for Divish, at least. If he ever found out. He never found out during my entire playthrough, so I don't know how that went out. But this is where we get another trophy, and it was a side quest slash missable trophy, as you had the option to either sleep with Stephanie or not. So good thing I made the right choice then, in a sense. But yeah, after some more exploring, I just went back to do the hunting trip, which we ended up in a hunting competition with Hans, and I tried my best to serve him right. I killed about like 8 hares, I think, and it was like 2 deers maybe. But I screwed up as well with this thing, because apparently, from now that I researched, if you cooked the meat that you gathered from the hunting trip, then it doesn't really recognize that you hunted anything, so it kind of just ends with you and Hans in a tie, and he says, oh, look at that, we both suck. But in my pride, I cooked him. All right, he lost. It couldn't have been any more different. But after our little small hunting day of going for hares, he wanted to go for something bigger, which ended up being for boar. And apparently, if you know anything about hunting in the 15th century, you do not hunt boars with bows and arrows. You got to use spears. And Hans thought he knew better, and so he shot once, and the boar fell over, and when he thought the boar was dead and was bragging and boasting to Henry, the boar got up and sprinted off. So we ended up having to go on a chase, and as I was following Hans on my horse, we ended up in a cumin camp where Hans gets knocked out, and so it's left to Henry to fight off and protect Hans, and basically fight for Henry's life in a 1v2 versus these 2 cumins, in which we were successful and able to take Hans back home to Ratai, where he was there to recover. And at the end of this hunting trip, I got another story trophy. Things begin to escalate fast as a stud farm in a small town called Neuhof gets attacked, and the weird part was the horses weren't stolen. They were all killed alongside with some villagers in Neuhof, and so Henry gets assigned to Captain Bernard's group to investigate the situation, and someone inside that operation with the bandits betrayed them, and it's kind of a betrayal story layered on top of a war story, and Henry is the one to untangle it all. The Neuhof investigation is where the game kind of opens up in a big way, as you're talking to survivors, following leads, riding out to bandit camps, and piecing together a picture from incomplete information. But the end of the Neuhof part is concluded by us finding a survivor from Neuhof named Ginger, and he ran away because he recognized one of the bandits that was there, and he thought that the bandits would come back to kill him, as he knew one of their faces, which kind of was the case, as I had to kill 2 bandits that were also looking for him. And after we get the information, we find out that the bandits that he knew was named Lubosh, and he had a limp. And so when we find out where he was from, it takes us to Uzhitz. And during our investigation in Uzhitz, we've come along a certain parish priest over here by the name of Godwin, and he quickly becomes one of my favorite side characters in a game in general. And he is not your average priest. He does a lot of sinning, but he still preaches. And it turns out that Lubosh was confessing to Godwin about what he was about to do, or had done at the time, and he was talking about Neuhoff. And so for us to get that information from Godwin, we had to do a night of drinking, which goes a lot overboard, and we have one hell of a night. And by the morning, Godwin is so hungover, and he still has to speak at mass that they had, but he couldn't speak really because he was too hungover. So he assigns Henry, as if Henry wasn't the same amount of hungover probably, to give a speech to the people. And so we kind of BS'd our way through, and luckily with some speech checks, it ended up working. And yeah, so after we got the information, we also get a trophy for going out drinking with Godwin. But yeah, we got the information we needed, which kind of took us through other towns such as Ledechko and a mill that's also by Merhoyed, and we ended up getting information from the rest of the bandits that were with Lubosh, and we were able to find out where the rest of the bandits that were kind of on different sides from Lubosh and them, and that's why this whole thing started, was because one group of bandits split when the raid was going down, the other one wants to find the rest of the bandits that we ended up tracking down, and such a fiasco that happened. But we find out that they have been camping out in a ruined town in the forest called Pribyslavitz, and so we do our best to sneak in. Now, I learned later on that there was a couple ways to sneak in, and we'll talk about some other ones later, but I thought back to when I was in Talmberg, to when I had the guard outfit to sneak out, and I figured if I got a cumin outfit, maybe I could make my way through, and turns out it was, as I was able to lure one guard over and fight him one-on-one, and then take his outfit, and then whenever a cumin walked up to me, I had the speech check to pass, and I was finally able to make my way up to the top of the building, where we found out that Runt was the one that was leading Pribyslavitz, alongside with two other Cuman leaders, as the Cumans and the regular bandits were both working together at this point. And with this information, and also the fact that I was able to burn some of the arrows to try to sabotage them before we ended up making it back to Radzik's camp, which was nearby Merhoyed, as another small village. And when we reported this to him, he sent us to go to Talmberg to talk to Sir Divish and gather his forces, or what forces he can spare, and meet him outside of Pribyslavitz as we begin our attack to clear out the bandit encampment. Now, this is like the first major battle that you can do in this game, and it's honestly pretty fun for what you could do so far. And it draws a lot of similarities with a war in Skyrim that I grew up with, playing and encountering both sides, but I mean, obviously you only get one side here, but it felt kind of similar, where we get our side of the soldiers and we just fight with the other in one giant battle. And then at one point we were assigned with clearing out the archers on the hill that led up to the main building where Runt was hiding. And towards the end, at one point, when I end up in a 1v1 versus Runt in what I think is called the steeple of the church, I am not too sure about that, don't quote me, but this is technically like a boss fight in a way. The boss fights aren't like actual boss fights, it would seem, but you're in a 1v1, nothing special. We took care of business real quick with Runt, especially after the beginning of the game, where I spent so much time training with Captain Bernard and learning the Master Strike and whatnot, so it made everything pretty easy in the game. And when we were questioning Runt on where Sir Radzik's sword went up, Henry decided to go a little overboard here, and Runt wasn't able to answer because Henry killed him brutally, honestly. And it was only then that Captain Robard and Radzik had to stop us and kind of bring Henry back to reality. And this concludes the Pribyslavitz raid, and towards the end you'll get a hint of who's really the mastermind behind it. Kinda, you don't really see his face of the person, but it shows that it's not over yet. After the attack on Pribyslavitz and clearing out the bandits, Henry gets a new room inside of Ratai, which is where we end up waking up, and then we get another story trophy here. We had to go over to meet with Sir Radzik and Sir Hanush up in Hanish's castle. And over there we learned that Merhoyed had been attacked by bandits shortly after we cleared out what was left of Pribyslavitz. And so Henry gets sent on an investigation to go out there. But when we make our way there, we learn that Merhoyed is facing what's suspected of a plague, according to the villagers there. And during our investigation, we learned that they actually fought off the bandits before they fell ill, and they actually had one of the bandits locked up inside of one of the barns. But the leader of Merhoyed wouldn't let us talk to him until we helped him try to figure out what was going on with the sickness. And so we did some more investigating, got some more clues about the symptoms of what everyone's facing, and then we had to go over to Sasau to meet with one of the monks, and we got him to help us figure out what was going on and also come up with a diagnosis on what the villagers were going through. And from what we've gathered, we learned that they actually had been poisoned, and it was in the water supply that the bandits contaminated and ended up having some people die and all of their animals dying. And so once we figured that out, we had to hurry and make up a remedy and then meet with that monk who ended up over in Merhoyed to start tending to the sick. And after we finally helped deal with the poisoning, we finally got to talk with the bandit that they had imprisoned and finally gained evidence of some suspected counterfeit with the silver that's been going on. After we gained the evidence of what's been going on with the counterfeit mints, before I continued my investigation on that, I decided to go back and check with Teresa, as we had another date with her, and this one stayed at the mill, and one thing led to another, and by the end, Henry sealed the deal is what I'm gonna say here for that. And at the end of that is another trophy for courting Teresa. Also, during this, I went back to Merhoyed to check on the people after we gave them the remedy, and turns out they were all better, and this is where you can get a missable trophy if you actually didn't cure them, so thankfully I got this one right. We found out that the way that these Cumans and these bandits are being paid for is with counterfeit mints, and so the investigation into Sigismund's operation leads to someone undermining the economy of Bohemia by flooding it with fake currency, and the trail leads to an operation that's bigger and more organized over by Gutenberg, but we'll just deal with what's happening in this region. And so Henry has to track down and figure out who's running it, and we made our way through, and we also encountered along the way a man that was also kind of, you could say, that was on the same path as us, but from a different family, and apparently there was beef with that family and Radzig. And so when I defeated him in a one-on-one, I mean, this is another RPG choice. He probably could have kept him alive and we could have seen what happened, but I just killed the dude. I just decided to make it easier, and I don't know if it does make it easier or not. It probably made it harder, if I'm being honest, because we did some more investigating in Sasau with Tobias Fafar, who is like under Sir Radzig's service or whatnot, but he could help us read and investigate what's going on with the counterfeit operation here in Sasau and whatnot. And this leads us to an abandoned mine near Skalitz, where we ended up finding who was running the whole operation over here, and we ended up shutting it down by, I kind of just ran past the bandits that were here and made my way to the guy. And yeah, because honestly, the freaking, when you're outnumbered and it's just you versus a whole camp, it's overwhelming, more overwhelming than I'd say in this game than it is in the second game. And so yeah, when I made my way over there, I kind of just dealt with their leader and took him as a prisoner and sent him to Ratsai, and that kind of sealed up this whole ordeal, or so we thought, as we were talking with the prisoner that we took, and we found out that there was a way to infiltrate the bandits as a spy and figure out what their whole plan is. And this ended up taking us to a whole different ordeal, where we ended up meeting with these bandits at night in the church in Sasau, and he wanted us to prove ourselves in a way, and by doing that we had to kill Pius, who was one of the guys, if I'm not mistaken, that were part of the Neuhof massacre, and he ran off and split from the other two that we hunted down earlier, and he actually became a monk to hide himself from the bandits and kind of try to change his life around, you could say. And so we kind of had to do the same. We had to go undercover inside a monastery and pretend we were a monk. And I will not lie to you, this part was brutal. Not for difficulty, not for like a whole bunch of bandits or sneaking. I mean, there was some sneaking around, but it's not impossible. But just, I will not lie, this part's, I got stumped for investigating, and I also, it gets a little boring here. And that is because when you go undercover as the monk in the monastery, you have to do exactly what they tell you to do in the schedule to not get in trouble. There's ways to avoid it, but I never did that. I honestly was kind of afraid. I didn't know what would happen, and this was brutal. I probably spent I really think it was like around 4 to 5 hours of gameplay, and yeah, it was, I gave up. I really did. So instead of that, I just decided to take all of the suspects that were hinted at for us, and I was just going to kill him. And when I got to this novice named Antonius, it turned out to be him, but I also screwed up here and killed him in front of people that woke up when they heard me killing him. So I had to hurry and take the die and make my escape and just run out, in which for some reason these guards glitched out in front of me and I was able to get away for the time being. But yeah, we got the evidence we needed. We killed the monk that was the bandit, and we had to go meet with the other bandits at the meetup location to get our good graces in and finally have it into the bandit camp. Also, during this time, I got a few more trophies that I did not really explain, and so I'm just gonna knock them out here right now. The next one was for getting inside the monastery as a monk and becoming one, and I guess you could say this probably could have been missable if you didn't do it this way and did the other way that the game hinted at, as just sneaking in at night and killing him, which I had never tested it, but if I simply could be. During my time in the monastery, I also got 2 more, I guess, miscellaneous trophies. One was for reading 20 books, and the other one was for walking more than 50 kilometers. Alright, continuing with the story, we found out that they're actually in Brannick, which is an abandoned town that was there, and the bandits just took over what was left of the ruins and set up shop, which was smart for them because the walls there were still very much in good shape. And so we went to report our findings to Radzig and Hanish, and we told them that we had an inn, but Radzig was hesitant about sending us over, and we were able to convince him. And so we made our way over and infiltrated the base, and we seemed to be on good terms so far. And it wasn't until our second meeting with the leader, Eric, or so we thought, but he was meeting with the true leader, who ended up being Istvan Toth. And he wasn't brought up earlier, but he was actually there in Skalitz the day that it was raided, and he was actually visiting Sir Radzig on good terms, and nothing really stood out for him being the one behind all of this. And so when Henry saw him there with the sword that Henry's father made for Radzig, Henry tried to attack him on sight, but he was quickly knocked out. And shortly after, he woke up being interrogated by Istvan and Eric, and this is where things took for a turn. Istvan wanted to use Henry as a ransom, in which would seem kind of odd considering that Henry would be just a regular soldier, or so he thought. Istvan ended up breaking the news to him, and it turned out that Henry is the bastard son of Sir Radzig Kabbalah. This changes things in Henry's eyes, and it makes a lot more sense now about the ransom. And so Henry was kept here in lockup until then, but a couple hours later, Henry was woken up again, and it was because he was freed by an old Skalitz neighbor, Davishek, who was the guy that we saw earlier with the bandits with Runt in Skalitz. And he wanted to free Henry and try to escape the bandit camp, because it turned out it's not everything he wanted it to be, and he's not cut out for that life. And so he wanted us to be freed and then help him escape and meet up with Sir Radzig, and then hopefully he'll be compensated. I agreed to let him do that, but honestly, I wasn't going to help him out at all. It still pissed me off with what he did with everything in Skalitz and what went down. So when I snuck around and got my stuff back and then made my way over the wall and tried to run back to where we were supposed to meet up with Zabishka, I ended up just going back to Ratai by myself. Also, after the scene of the interrogation and before we snuck out, I got a trophy for Henry finding out that he is a bastard and who his real father is. When we make it back to Ratai injured, Henry faces his real father, who he broke the news to about knowing who he really is to him, and Radzig promised that they'll have a talk later, but we told him about what everything's happening in Brannick and who's behind it all, and that's when everyone decided to quickly do something about it. And so they gathered up what was left of the Skalitz and the Ratai army, or what they could spare, and made their way over to Vranik. And Henry, after recovering, had to hurry and make his way to Talmberg to gather Sir Divish and his men too. When everyone is there, we finally begin our raid on Vranik, as while Henry was gathering forces with Sir Divish, the negotiations didn't work out so well. So we attacked by night with our archers shooting flaming arrows at the tents that were in the camp to start fires and chaos, and we were able to swiftly attacking and taking over Vranik. But by the end, we found out that Eric and Istvan aren't there, and according to what was left by notes, that there is other plans that they had established before, and that was that they knew that Vranik was going to be attacked, so they left whatever men they were going to not take with them, and ended up taking over Talmberg Castle when we all decided to attack Vranik at the same time. Also, after the attack on Vranik and conquering it, I got another story trophy here. So we quickly made our way back to Talmberg, and we quickly tried to take back the castle, but things didn't go well, as Istvan ended up taking Lady Stephanie as hostage, and also during our attack of trying to retake the castle, Sir Radzig went inside the inner walls by himself and also was taken captive. So Henry, Sir Divish, and Sir Hanush have to work together to free Henry's father and Sir Divish's wife. This is what starts the siege section and basically another big battle section, but we had to come up with different ideas before we resulted to the big one, which was building a trebuchet and sieging on the castle, which would cause a lot of destruction, and Sir Divish didn't want to do that. So we went from trying to sneak in at night with a small group, and Hans was also included that group, but I failed miserably on that. Didn't even make it past the first 2 guards. After that, and whatever plans else we tried, we ended up having to build the trebuchet, and this begins a very large section that I wanted to get done because I didn't know how it was going to affect the outcome of the battle or how difficult it was going to be. When we have to help Master Tobias Fafar build the trebuchet, there was other miscellaneous objectives for Henry to do in the meantime, and I would have ignored this if I was kind of speedrunning the story, which I'm glad I didn't, because this is honestly a missable trophy. And these had me preparing the soldiers for the siege, and I had quite a bit of time, I feel like, because when I got done with all of these objectives, I still had like maybe 3-4 days in game to spare before the actual attack started. But the main objectives were I had to gather, I think it was about 200 meat for the soldiers as they were running low on food. The other one was they started drinking through all the ale from the nearby taverns, so I had to go around and find an inn or another tavern that would help supply them with ale. I had to get a doctor for Sir Divish as he was injured during the first fight, and also for them to help tend to the other soldiers. I also had to help them find a priest to deal with all of the dead and help them give proper burials. Another one was that some of the soldiers were falling asleep, and so I had to help Bernard get them something that'll help them stay awake. And the final one was I needed to go to the charcoal burners and get them some pitch to help with their encampments and also the siege. This took me probably about, I want to say like 2 hours, because some of them, depending on how you go and who you recruit, will vary on how quickly you can get this done. So I couldn't get Godwin for the priest because I had to do some other story quests for him, and so instead of that, I had another quest done earlier where I helped Johanka, who was from Skalitz, and she was there at the Sasau Monastery tending to the injured from Skalitz, and this ended up taking me to another priest, and when I completed that entire quest line, I was able to recruit him. And also, if you aren't on good terms with the herbalist, apparently, then you can't just have her craft the potions. So what I just did was I sat there for the longest time crafting the cockerel potions, which are very neat in this game. 15th century energy drink, honestly. And so I had to craft about, I think it was like 60 of them maybe, and so that took me a minute too. But when I finally got everything done is when I got this trophy to pop, and alongside some other ones that I am now going to mention here because they happened during this time. One of them was for collecting 5,000 groschen and holding it at one time. Another was for discovering all of the locations on the map, and when they mean that, they mean the fast travel locations. And I got the last one from when I got to the glade for trying to get the ale for the soldiers. And as I say this now, I thought there was going to be more before I started talking, but yeah, that was the other two. And when I gathered everything and also the trebuchet was finally built, I was finally able to start the siege on Talmberg with everyone else. Also, between the actual attack and the preparation, there was a small little battle that we had as we were almost flanked by Eric, who wasn't with Sir Istvan and was bringing more troops for Istvan to help fight us and take us out. But we ended up being successful in that as we guided the Skalitz soldiers, Robard was guiding the Talmberg, and Hanush was guiding the Ratai soldiers. And we were able to capture Eric and take him as a prisoner, and we honestly tried to do a trade, but that didn't go through, so it really did end up to having to start the attack on Talmberg. Now I think there was like 3, maybe 2 different ways that they were going to attack, and so one of them was they were going to have a group attack after the trebuchet hits the front gate so that the bridge would drop down and they can cross, while the other group was going to scale up on the side, kind of like when we snuck in, and that's where Henry was assigned to. So we quickly scaled up the ladder with the other soldiers and tried to wipe out as many bandits as we could before we ended up hitting Sir Istvan and another one of his bandits with the 2 hostages upstairs in a tower. And Hanush negotiated him with giving Sir Istvan a free walk out on Hanush's noble honor, but Sir Istvan said that he was going to take Radzig with him until they got to the border of the region, and then he was going to leave him there. And so when they finally made their exit, Hans, Henry, and a group of soldiers followed them, and they ended up going to where it all started, Skalitz. We quickly rode over there, and we found out that Sir Istvan kept his word and let Sir Radzig go right before they left their region. And so after that, Hans and the soldiers decided to chase off after Istvan, while Henry and Radzig had their one-on-one talk about everything and also what really happened between him and his mother. And it turned out that Radzig and Henry's mom had an affair, and when Henry was conceived, nothing could really happen to that, but Martin showed up around the same time to adopt Henry and also take care of Henry's mother at the same time, which is why Martin got the blacksmith forge so close to the castle, and it all makes sense now. And after they finished their conversation and right when they were about to ride off back to Talmberg and meet up with the rest of the group, we see that another group of soldiers and a noble pull up, and we find out that it's actually Margrave Jobst of Moravia, and he actually wanted to talk to Sir Hanush and Radzig, which will end up being talked about in the epilogue. After all that, the credits kind of roll here, and it's like technically the ending. But the epilogue here also sets up for the second game, and we find out because when we get to the castle with Hans, Radzig, Hanush, and everyone to meet with Sir Jobst and John of Liechtenstein, who also came with him, we find out that even though that Jobst was the one that betrayed Wenceslas and sided with King Sigismund, Jobst apparently has a change of heart and wants to betray Sigismund now, and he wants to gather forces again to rebel against Sigismund now and free his cousin Wenceslas. It's very complicated with this guy. He definitely reminds me of like Littlefinger and that slimy bastard from Game of Thrones, but their best bet was to talk to the League of Lords, who was the ones that honestly helped Sigismund get to power, and that was best by having them create a letter to send to Sir Otto von Berghoff, who is the leader of the League of Lords in a sense, and who other than Henry and Hans gets sent to deliver that letter and help parlay with Otto von Berghoff and see where they are at. And so after this entire meeting and the entire letter gets written, Hans, Henry, and his group of soldiers, they all set off to Trotsky, which is set up for the second game, and that is technically the end of the story here. Also, during this time, apparently I was overstuffed for Henry, like character-wise, because there's like nourishment and you can overeat in the game. If you stayed overstuffed for 3 days consecutively, then this trophy will pop. And then the other one was for when the story ended, I finally got the completion of the main storyline trophy. And now, with the main story done, we get to finally go on to the trophy cleanup. And There are quite a bit. I have about another 30 to go before we get the platinum trophy. And so once you complete the epilogue part, it just ends the game. Like, you can't really free roam after that. So your free roam is the epilogue before you meet with Hans to ride off. But I didn't do that here. And so what I did was, because if you complete the Vranik section, you miss a lot of quests, and I need those for a trophy called Completionist. And so that required, I think it was like around 70 to 80 trophies. It's never been specifically stated how many you need, I think, and because I kept getting different numbers online. But yeah, so I had a save before I started Vranik, and I just went back to that, and instead of continuing on with that part, I just knocked out all of the side quests and what I needed here. And the first one I decided to do was the Robber Baron quest line, and so this is where Hans starts coming up a lot more with the side quests. And when you progress his side quest chain, you end up having to take on this Robber Baron who ended up being related to Captain Bernard in a way, and you gotta help either talk him out of it, kill him, fight him off, imprison him, whatever it is. I just ended up killing him, and at the end of his story and this quest, you get the trophy. Now, this next one, if you remember Ginger from the Neuhof massacre that I brought up, at the end of his story, you get to talk to him and convince him to go back. And so that's what I ended up doing. And finally, like, you could do this immediately after, but I ended up just doing this now. And when you meet up with Ginger and Neuhof, you get a trophy and also see that he's doing fine now. The next one I got was the opposite of that Fatso trophy where you stayed overstuffed, and this one was anorectic and you had to let Henry starve for 3 days in game. After that, I decided to go on a little hunting trip and kill, basically bag 50 game animals, which I just spent a lot of time hunting deer and hares and whatever else was roaming around. After that, I committed a crime and I ended up having to spend time in jail. And this next trophy pops for when you spend 3 days in prison. After that, I decided to do the Master Huntsman trophy, which was to have me help this former huntsman of Talmberg, or I think that's where he was in, but you had to help him basically prove his innocence as he was falsely accused of some crime and another huntsman took over his spot that ended up blackmailing him. And so we just kind of did the same thing to him and got him to leave the position basically. And when we got everything that we needed to take to Sir Divish, he ended up appointing Henry as the new huntsman of Talmberg, and at the end of that quest is when that trophy popped. The next one, I went for going for 2 full days without sleeping, and that was for the Insomniac trophy. This one was honestly an absurd trophy, I will not lie, and that was to find all wayside shrines and conciliatory crosses. And that may seem like an excessive amount, especially when you look at a map and see how crazy the count is, but really it's just 90 of them, and you can't just stumble upon them and ride past. You have to get off your horse or whatever and then go and read the shrine and then back on your horse and move on to the next. And this, I took focus for a couple of hours, and that was pretty much my entire play session that day, and that's when I got that trophy to pop. The next one was honestly a quick one because I kind of cheesed it because I never used this, and it was the combos in combat. I used a mace. I wasn't memorizing the combos, so what I just ended up doing was you can train combos with Sir Bernard, and if you don't do the 3 that he was asking you to do and you just spammed a whole different combo, you can get those up pretty quick. And so I got that done in about 20 minutes, I want to say. This next one took us back to Ujits, and it had us on a quest given by Father Godwin, and we were sent to investigate some witch's sabbath that's happening in the woods. And if you interrupted with the sabbath thing that they got going on, then you just end up on some trip. I don't know what it is. It's some crazy drug that they have that only the women were using that they got from some herbalist, but yeah, that was pretty much it. After that, I decided to participate in a horse race in Talmberg for a quest, and if you win the race, that's when you just get the trophy. The next one, I decided to go back to a alchemy bench and brew 15 different type of potions, and you get this Edward Kelly trophy. This trophy alcoholic here, I probably should have done way earlier as my drinking level would have been lower, but I finally got it done here, and when you get Henry addicted to alcohol, that's how the trophy pops. King Charming. Now this one is an insane trophy as you had to get, I think it's like 9 or 10 different settlements or villages or whatnot. You had to get the reputation to be 80 or above, and some of them have only limited quests, and so you could either do a lot of haggling and getting reputation increases by that if you already finished all the quests and your rep wasn't that high enough. But I got lucky over here, and as I was letting time pass and completing other quests, I just randomly got it done. The next one I decided to go for was Gambler, and this was for winning 1,000 groschen through the dice minigame. And through my entire playthrough and collecting different dice from bandits and whatnot, or stealing it, this was pretty easy to stack the deck against me, per se. Now this next one was Thief, and it was for stealing 30,000 groschen worth of stuff, or groschen in total, that is collected to that. And I did a lot of pickpocketing and theft throughout the journey to get my skill up, and when I finally just broke into this tailor's store and started stealing all of his stuff, I got the trophy to pop. This other one was kind of absurd too, and it was called Sniper, and I had to get 50 headshots with a bow against enemies, and I wasn't preparing for that at all, so I had to go just from bandit camp to bandit camp, hoping that some of them would respawn by the time I got there, and sometimes I would get lucky with headshots in actual camps. After that, I got another miscellaneous trophy called Haggler, and it was for saving 2,000 groschen through haggling, which if the higher your speech is, the easier it can be to do this. And also with the more amounts of stuff you're selling or buying too, it increases the total amount you can haggle. Next, I did another side quest trophy called Spoil Sport, where I had to sabotage all 3 planned executions for this guy, Herman, who was the actual executioner in Ratai, but he had his job taken by the one from Gutenberg, as he was the more proficient one apparently. And when you completely sabotage the entire thing for him is when you get the trophy. Judas follows the Gallows Brothers questline, where you're given the option to portray 2 friends who were from Skalitz actually, and it's Matthew and Fritz, and they had their whole entire questline of finding new work, not really working around, and they actually wanted to do a heist on the Tomberg quarry and steal all the groschen there. That was supposed to be pay wages for the actual people working in the quarry. The guy at the end, at the glade, apparently called Andrew, gives you this idea to turn them in. And so what I actually ended up doing was I ended up taking the groschen for myself and then turning in everyone, Matthew, Fritz, and Andrew. And when you finally get to see the outcome of that quest and you go visit where they were hung, that's when the trophy would pop. After that, I decided to go for Stealth Killer, which was 20 stealth kills on enemies, not just people, but it had to be enemies. And you also can't even do this unless your stealth kill is at level 5. That's when you unlock the stealth kill perk. But I would do the same thing as I was doing for the 50 headshots, where I would just sneak into camps and then just knock everyone out, or just start doing the executions or the stealth kills, I guess. And at the 20th one is when I finally got the trophy to pop. Next was a very, and I mean very, grindy trophy, and it was for collecting 10,000 herbs. But luckily, the higher your herbalism skill is, the more you pick up off of one button press. And so I definitely made my way around, but right next to Ravna, which was this town between Skalitz and Tomberg, they had open fields of just many herbs, and so I was able to farm all that and then wait a couple days for them to respawn and start farming it again to get the trophy. Serial Killer. I will not lie to you, this one wasn't that bad, because aside from me doing quests and actually going for the stealth kill one and the headshots, I was moving on these numbers. And by the time I finished up all that and got to this point, I really didn't do much, as it kind of just happened as I was progressing the story. And luckily, it's not enemies, it could be anyone, so as long as it's just 200 people, you're good. Here is where I was talking about the completionist, because I finally, when I got everything else and I could progress further, I just finished out the story to where I could get to the epilogue, because that was the next checkpoint I had to hit. And I thought I was going for 80, but right here it was like, I think like 76 or 75. I got the completionist trophy, and I was shocked and I kind of missed it because I wasn't really paying attention to the dialogue or listening because I was in a call with a friend on Discord. And yeah, that's how I got the completionist. Next one happened as I was also finishing out the story, and it was called Bard, and that was for maxing out your speech skill to level 20, which took a minute, but make sure if you're going for this, check all the dialogue options you can. Any questions and anything. Even if you skip over it, I'd recommend not. If it's your first playthrough, don't skip over any dialogue. But yeah, Bard popped literally around the same time as completionist. This next one was a missable that I did not know was a missable at the time, and it was for after you captured Eric and you interrogated him a little bit before you try to do the trade. You have to win all of the speech checks that you could with Eric, and so I had to make sure I had high charisma. I already had the maxed out speech skill, and I also make sure I had to be like intimidating. And when I finally got all of those stat factors and the passes through is when I got the trophy to pop. Finally, I had to finish out the story to get to the epilogue for this part right here, and this one trophy, level cap, which is reaching the maximum main level in KCD1, and your overall level is essentially based down to 5 things. Your 4 main stats or skills, and the last one being main story progression. Now, I already had the story done, speech was up, strength was up, and vitality was up. The last thing I needed was agility. And so I didn't know which one was faster. I thought since dodging applies to agility a lot more, that if I just trained a lot with Bernard, that I could get my last 2 levels I needed because it was stuck at 18 and get my agility up to 20. And then finally, after who knows how long, I was not keeping count, I got that to level 20 so I can get the maximum level. And that is everything I need to do in my first playthrough. I had to start up the next playthrough, and luckily this can be quicker, but it's going to be extremely difficult. And that was because of the one trophy I was talking about at the beginning, and this one is Merciful. I can't kill anyone besides Runt, because Runt is a locked-in kill for the story, and so he's the only one I can kill in the game. So no sword, no mace, no axe. What I did have was these hands, and at one point I pulled out a bludgeon to get one guy to surrender. This other one was easier, but the next one was for doing an entire playthrough without sleeping with anyone, and that was called the Virgin Trophy, which I didn't know the trophy was going to be that realistic, but come on, game. And so yeah, we started the second playthrough, started trying to rip through the story as much as I can, but I had to make sure I had to get another one at the start before I continued on, and that was called Firestarter. When you're in Skalitz at the very beginning, there is a missable trophy, and you had to get yourself arrested in Skalitz to where you get locked up, and this starts a alternate ending technically, kind of like in Fallout 4 when the bombs dropped and you just, instead of running to the vault, you started running down the street, kind of like that, where if you get locked up in prison and the raid happens, no one's there to free Henry when he's in prison, so the fires are burning, Henry gets burned alive basically in prison, and that was the trophy there for Firestarter. But after that, I shortly just tried to speedrun as fast as possible, looking up guides as much as I could, and got the Virgin and Merciful done. But I kid you not, that Tomberg battle had me irate for like, I think it took me 2 hours to get through because I kept dying and starting over and trying different tactics, or I would pull out a bludgeon and accidentally kill someone. It was egregious, but finally I was able to get that done. And when we rode off, that's when I got the last 3 trophies: Virgin, Merciful, and the Platinum. And there we go, another Platinum trophy. But yeah, this game was so good. I understand now why I got a second game, and I'm glad it did, because the second game is my favorite of all time, and this is not far behind it. Fell in love with Ratai, Skalitz, or what was left of Skalitz, Sasau, pretty quickly. My only biggest gripe was that monastery part, because that monastery part was dreadful. But hopefully I'll do another playthrough here soon and actually explore it and see what other outcomes I can have with it, other than like talking to Pius and faking the death and whatnot. But yeah, other than that, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and hit that bell so you know when the new content drops. And don't forget to leave a like as well if you enjoyed the video. It really helps the channel and it will help this series keep going. And I can't wait for you guys to see what's next. And yeah, see you guys on the next journey following Henry again.